This is DevOps in Agile Way podcast.
Hello everyone again. So today we continue our discussion with our great guest Sam Williams. Last week we discussed a few topics already. This time we will continue this discussion. We will touch certifications, we will touch serverless. So I'm looking forward to this discussion and what Sam has to say to us. So I hope you too. And what to say more here. Enjoy. 17 days from the idea to the first income. It doesn't matter what this income was at this point. The speed. Think about this like 10, 20 years ago. In 17 days, you just can have like a order sent for the server which you buy, right? So this is the power of serverless here. And we have the live proof that it works in that way. Thank you very much for sharing this with us because yeah, and I think you were maybe not first, right? But one of the first with this specific approach to OpenAI and LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I think I didn't know of anyone else that was using OpenAI. I know that there was one other product when I launched that was doing LinkedIn comment generation, but they were using their own custom bespoke AI solution, which was, having tested it, was a little bit lackluster compared to trying to beat ChatGPT or GPT-4. Like you're not gonna like train your own AI to be better than that. So yeah, I think I was. I think I was the first one that I knew of. There probably was someone else somewhere that had done something similar, but I was one of the first definitely to apply OpenAI to LinkedIn.
This shows also another aspect, right? So first, the good idea, it doesn't mean that you have to be first with this idea, but also how quickly you will turn this idea into something real. This is what you've done here. And this leads me back a little bit to the complete coding and helping CTOs, right? Because I believe that I see this is something on different level, right? Because you have your video where you solve some specific technical problem. You show how to solve it, and then the company try to implement it. But probably, I think, this is my imagination now, they are able to solve the problem, technical problem, but they cannot really apply this on the level of the process of the organization, right? This is probably the place where your help is a little bit different than just technicalities, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the first thing that I normally end up doing whenever I start working with a new startup is looking at not, okay, let's look at your architecture, let's look at all your lambdas, let's look at some code, or like let's look at your DynamoDB schema. It's none of that. It's okay, let's look at, okay, your AWS organizations, how are people accessing it? How are you controlling who accesses what? And then, okay, now let's look at your deployments. Like, how do you deploy these kind of things? How are they interacting? How are you testing new features without breaking your production environment? Like, looking at that. And I think the challenge with, I think this is probably a challenge that everyone will face and every technology stack will face is there isn't just, here is the perfect solution. And Amazon have shown this. Like they said, oh yeah, serverless is the best thing ever. And then obviously it's grown. Amazon Videos has grown, and they're like, oh no, we've got rid of serverless. We're going back to containers.
And serverless is dead. Microservices are dead. And
exactly.
Even AWS is dead, right?
Monoliths for the win. But that's because requirements change depending on the size of your business, the number of employees. So it's really hard to say, here's the exact Git methodology you should use. Here's the exact testing framework you should be using. Here's the exact deployment mechanisms you should be using. Because for me, when I was building this SaaS product, I had 2 environments. I deployed manually from my laptop. I didn't have any CI/CD because it was just me. Adding CI/CD just adds a little bit of extra overhead, which for the initial 17 days or for the initial 2 months when it's just me, it doesn't matter. You don't need that. But if I'd got to the point where I started hiring 2 or 3 developers, I would have had to implement a different set of processes and trying to. I think a lot of people just expect you to come in and go, here's my template, and this is what you need to do, step-by-step guide. And whilst I have a lot of templates, not all of them are applicable to every different business.
And that those templates are for building another templates, right? What you said is about the processes itself, etc., is very important. And Amazon Prime, this is, I heard the argument that they not only prove that serverless is wrong, but they've done bad architecture, that they've done bad business decisions, right? What is completely not true. In fact, they proved that the approach to the business was right. Only the circumstances changed, so they needed to change the approach. And with this one service, which is kind of supplementary service for the system, right? Because this was for the one of the monitoring elements. It's not the end of the world of the serverless, right? So no, the haters gonna hate, but they will not win this fight.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same with Basecamp. With Basecamp moving away from AWS completely onto their own on-prem software, it's like there's a lot of AWS is dead now that Basecamp is leaving. But if you actually read through, they say running in AWS was the only thing that allowed them to get to where they are. If they tried to run on-prem from day one, they would have died. And
Exactly.
it's the same with serverless. It's like there is going to be a certain point, a certain scale where actually it's more efficient to be in containers than it is to be in serverless. There's going to be a point where it's more efficient to be on-prem than it is in AWS. But like I think I worked out like a rough estimate of like unless your AWS bill is more than $50,000 a month, you shouldn't even think about moving away from serverless because everything else is going to start is like the cost savings you can make moving away from serverless. Yeah, you may save 15 grand a month, but you're also going to increase your costs by 18 grand a month. It's like
Exactly.
that doesn't make sense. And
exactly.
yeah.
And only the thing is that you need to build a solution in the proper way for the specific architecture, right? In the first episode of this podcast, I mentioned like an example of a very bad design where we have, for example, 10 millions of execution of Lambda function, and each execution takes 14 minutes and 30 seconds for 1 gig of RAM. It is a crazy amount of money. But the question is, if you have something what is run for 14 minutes, 30 seconds in Lambda, are you sure that you are doing the right thing? Look at your code, look at your approach, of course, infrastructure as well, and think what you should improve or change, because definitely you will do something wrong. Right. And, we discussed the different elements of trainings, of approach to the learning curve in the cloud environments, and also how to help CTOs. So this leads us finally to this topic about the certification and certificates themselves. And let me ask you with in crazy way, because kind of comments like this I saw in your profile and also on mine. Why you hate certificates so much?
So I think certificates are actually very good. I think that at the right time in your career, having an appropriate AWS certification it won't change your life. It won't guarantee you're going to double your salary, but it'll help you get into an extra interview. Out of 5 interviews, you might get 6 instead. I think at the right time, it's good. What I think people mistake that for is I need the certification to get into that career. So people think to become a solution architect, you need to have the Solution Architect Pro cert. People think that to become a developer using AWS, you need to have the Developer Associate cert. And this kind of approach of like, I need the certificate, that leads people to focusing on learning the facts you need to pass an exam instead of learning the skills you need to actually become a valuable member of a team. And that's my big dislike for, not necessarily for certs, but for the way that
Approach to them.
approach to it, to certs, and especially like there are certain people from AWS who have kind of preached this, oh, AWS certs are the way that you progress your career. And the fact that AWS has named them after job roles in AWS probably exacerbates this. But yeah, I think certs are great as a way to validate the experience you already have. I think even AWS, if you look at their AWS certificate page, if you look at a developer role, it's a developer cert, it says this should be taken after working with AWS for at least 1 year.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. That is a perfect time. If you've been working with AWS for a year, you're probably like maybe junior or mid, like trying to get your first mid-level developer role. Like at that point, saying, okay, I'm going to do my cert, it'll help fill in some of the areas of knowledge that you might not have got through that year of experience, which will help broaden your experience and knowledge. But then when you do go to an interview, and I think this is one thing that a lot of people don't think about, is like, as an interviewer, as an employer trying to hire someone new, I'm just trying to work out how likely is it that you're going to be a really good developer and how likely is it that you're going to be a really bad developer.
Yeah.
There are different things that can kind of hint or suggest that you're going to be good. So, like having a degree in computer science, that suggests that you have an understanding of computer science. But you can definitely be a really bad developer with a CS degree. In the same way, having a cert, it suggests that you are a good developer. It suggests that you understand and you know AWS, but it doesn't guarantee it. And I think a lot of employers are realizing that you can go onto Udemy and you can buy a course on sale for $9.99. You can watch those 4 hours of someone reading through some slides. You can write down a load of facts, and especially definitely for the associate and even for some of the like professional and specialists, you can pass one of these certs without ever having touched AWS.
That is true.
That just means that companies are realizing that someone that comes in and can't really answer the normal development questions you would expect, but has a cert, actually that person has probably gone down let's call it it's not quite a cheat sheet route, but it's like they've gone down a route which means that combination of lacking any practical skills or experience, but having a cert, those kind of people tend to be the ones that are compensating for not being a very good developer.
That's true. And I've done a lot of interviews in my life, especially in my last 4 or 5 years. I developed a way to test it even before it became like kind of issue on the market. I need like 2, max 3 questions. And I know exactly what you said, that the person just did that, all the trainings, materials, some dumps, maybe even, but never really touched the console, because the second question I will not share it because it's my secret
Sauce.
and yes, and I want to use it. So no, I'm kidding. So those questions were about the load balancers, and the question about the differences between different load balancers. It's easy because every single training for the certification will explain the differences between those load balancers. But when you ask about, all right, so I have this load balancer and I want to proxy traffic, how can I do it? What are the possibilities, options, etc., etc., etc.? Very often it is enough to just log there once to see them. The most iconic interview I had, there was a guy who answered the question about load balancers, like big smile. Then I asked second question, also okay, I don't know, and it was so funny. It was so hard to not laugh. So certificates, yes, as a kind of proof or milestone for you to see where you are, where to go. That's perfectly fine. Also, what we need to mention that all this kind of certification processes like AWS, etc., which is completely different from for example, from Kubernetes or Red Hat, at least long time ago, where you had really hands-on exam. And this may say already something, right? That you have the skill to pass the certificate. You have the technical skill to pass the certificate because, for example, for Red Hat certified technician, like 10 years ago, the first task was to kind of break into not working machine, right? You don't have a root password and you just need to start it. So how to do it? All of those certifications like AWS is doing right now, they are more theoretical. You have number of questions, you need to select the proper answer. So with proper luck, I don't have it anyway, with proper luck you can just go to the room and just hit 100%, right?
Yeah.
Without knowing anything. This is quite interesting. But there is another aspect, and we both were victim of that, right? And there are I don't know, companies or people who will even pass the certificates for you, right?
Yes.
So you will receive the beautiful page with beautiful badge that you pass the certificate, even don't think what it is at all, right? What you pass. So how do you think, should vendors, how we as a some community can, I don't know, counteract something like that? It's extremely tough, I think.
Yeah, I think the one kind of on a side topic to this, like a lot of people have said, "Oh, you don't like the AWS exams because they're just questions and it's multi-choice." And they're like, "Oh, how would you do it better?" And I think the problem is it's very hard because the requirements AWS have for exams are it needs to be absolutely fair. So then every answer needs to have, or every question needs to have an exactly correct answer.
Yeah.
So having a discussion like we're having. So if the question was like, how would you architect this feature? Like, and then you write out your answer. That means that a human has to read the answer and great and give it a score. If I was if I was one of those assessors, I now, if I'm having a bad day, if I've woken up on the wrong side of the bed, I'm like, oh, that's only a 5. Whereas if I've had a really good day, if I'm feeling really like really happy, or I can go, oh, actually, yeah, that exact same answer, I'll give it a 7 because I think that's a good. They've written it well, and that becomes subjective. And as soon as that
Yeah.
comes in, it's harder for AWS to justify a lot of things, and also paying those experienced developers to sit there and read answers from exams is going to be expensive.
Oh yes.
So kind of having that scalability and the like for I don't know how many millions of certificates are taken a year, but there's probably a scary number and I'd love to know. But like
Yeah.
I don't know how I would do it better with the requirements AWS have. On back onto that question around like how do we handle the people that just pay someone else to take the certificate for them? I think it's almost a self-handling issue because as you said, if someone comes to interview and they have a certificate and they can't answer that they might no, in your case they'll struggle with the first question and then they'll
Yeah.
struggle even more with the second question because they don't even have that theoretical knowledge. So I think that it means that there might be slightly more people in that Reddit thread complaining saying I'm AWS certified and I can't get a job, or I'm AWS certified and I can't become a solution architect. Um, I think there's going to be like it's going to increase the number of those because someone's paid like I think you pay like 2.5 times how much the certificate costs on top
Yeah.
just to get the badge. If you don't have the skills, if you don't have the knowledge, then you're still not going to get the job because any decent interviewer is going to understand that, yeah, you don't have the skills. It's the same as all you're doing when you pay for one of those is you're paying to not have to sit there and memorize a load of facts. You can memorize a load of facts, or you can pay someone to take the exam. Either way, you end up without the skills and with a badge.
Yeah, and the badge is something what you can just draw in any paint program. Right, so that's true. And the most annoying part here is that your talent acquisition probably lost some time to find out that this person is, well, I say that, cheater, right?
Yeah.
So that's true. And for the final topic for our great discussion, because this time is kind of relative, and when you have someone cool to talk with, the time is passing very, very quickly. I would like to refer to what you mentioned somewhere on the beginning, serverless as a tool set, right? Because very often we treat serverless in very simplistic way. So it is Lambda function. I'm talking about AWS right now, right?
Yeah.
It's Lambda function or an API maybe, right? And that's it. But in fact, there is the whole ecosystem behind that.
Yeah.
How we can build this understanding, and also how we can convince, like you said, for example, CTOs, right, to use the full blown power of serverless with everything in front of Lambda function, in backend of Lambda function, and sometimes even without Lambda function, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is definitely it's something I've thought quite a lot about. Like, how do you demonstrate the value? And I think it comes down to, especially for a CTO or for a founder, it comes down to like, here's an application or here are multiple applications that have been developed in a third of the time that it would have been with another mechanism. Here are 20 different applications that are running for like $1 a month or a couple of dollars a month that even with the smallest even with the smallest EC2, you've got to add in redundancy and all of that, would be costing you 20 times as much. And like, here are like the examples of companies that are running with 5 developers or 10 developers and running what looks like from the outside like a
Mm,
massive technical solution. And whilst it might be a very technical solution, because most of the infrastructure is managed, you can have a much smaller team. And I've one of the startups I worked with as a developer right at the start, we grew from, I think, a team of like 10 people in total. And when I left, there was like 95 people. And one of the most difficult parts about that was not the how do we make our architecture more scalable. That was relatively simple. We were using serverless. It was how do we make our teams more scalable?
mm,
Because hiring more people, finding good talent, and then trying to work out, okay, now instead of having just you've got like the product owner and there's 4 or 5 developers underneath with that working with them, you've now got 30 developers. That they can't have that one-to-one time with the product owner. You need multiple product owners now, multiple project managers, and like the organization from a human perspective, like the human resources and the interactions, and do you go into a hierarchical structure or do you try and keep it flat? this that becomes a much bigger pain point, and that was something that I saw especially upper management spent a lot more of their time discussing and trying to figure out and banging their head against a wall about that than about, okay, that's the architecture we're going with, or how do we decrease our AWS bill, because
mm,
that's something that so many people don't think about when adopting a traditional architecture, and that can cripple companies
yeah,
when things go wrong. And I think the way to convince people is just show, here are all the benefits. Yes, and be very open about the fact there are some drawbacks. When
yeah,
you start having 100 million users, or yeah, when you've got 100 million users, Cognito is extortionately expensive.
yes.
But you've not got 100 million users, you've got 13 users. Or you've got, even like with my own app, like I've got like 500 users now or something like that. Like, I think I'm like 1% of the way into free tier.
Yeah.
And I know that I could scale so much more. And even if it does get into the paid tier, it's like, it's not going to be a significant cost. And I think a lot of people tend to try and work out, oh, how much would it cost when we are a massive company? And as we talked about right at the start, like, there's a scale where things become inefficient. If Basecamp had started on using on-prem software, they would never have grown to the company they are. Like,
Yeah.
don't be scared about adopting serverless because you think in 3 years' time it might get expensive. Because the startup I worked at, I think we completely re-engineered and re-architected the whole platform about 4 times in 3 years. So when you get to 3 years, that next re-architecture step is just re-architecting it from serverless to containers if you're at the scale where it makes sense.
And very often I heard that this is the cost, right? First of all, the cost of the re-architecting, and second, cost of the architecture and the whole efforts put into this before. But again, this is a very wrong perception, in my opinion, right? Because what you've done, it means you are already on the market, and you have money to do this re-architecture, right? In case of your application, so now, as you said, you are in somewhere in the beginning of the free tier, but let's suppose you grow very quickly from today because this podcast is so popular. No, it's not. But anyway, you grow very quickly, but you can observe this trend and you can act on it earlier because you understand what's going on in something what is already live. And this is what you had thanks to approach you choose on the beginning. So this is only win-win for you. There is nothing what you lose on it, right? Definitely this is very important, and I have to disagree with you with this, that scaling of the technological scaling is easy. Looking on the Black Friday and so many issues with internet shops, it's not that easy, at least.
Yeah. Black Friday is always a bit of chaos, isn't it?
Yeah. But this is something quite interesting because sometimes I think that we live in some kind of bubble, right? Because we are really enthusiasts. We dig deep into the new approaches, dig deep in the proper processes, dig deep into all those aspects which allow us to create, to build things in the best possible way, right? With all aspects around, but best possible way. And very often this is something what is lacking somehow on the market. I think now, as we already talked a lot of the, time, and I took already a lot of your time, I think with this, that the best ending of this discussion is to encourage all of our people who were listening to these episodes to check Sam Williams trainings and learn a lot from it and just adapt it to their own daily basis work. So, Sam, thank you very much for joining me today. It was
No,
really
my
pleasure
pleasure.
to talk with you, and finally we saw each other.
Face to face, yeah.
Yes, it was really great experience, and thank you very much for helping me with this podcast. And I really enjoyed discussing all those topics with you.
Yeah, me too. I had a great time, and yeah, time, as you said, is flies by when you're enjoying it. So yeah, it's didn't realize it was that long into the recording, but yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, and take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DevOps in Agile Way podcast with your host, Pawel. Subscribe, comment, and do not forget to check our next episodes. Stay tuned. Stay safe. Stay curious.